My name is Jackie, and this is Allie.
Hello.
And we're going to just kind of go through the basics of applying. It may feel overwhelming, I'm going to warn everybody, but I thought I would give you more information, or we would give you more information than less, because you're starting off early. A lot of times people don't start preparing until like September, unfortunately, sometimes even October. So the fact that you're even thinking about starting early, that's a really good thing. So,
do you want to maybe just tell them a little bit about your background?
Sure.
Okay.
So I was a student here 2 years ago. I graduated 2 years ago. And I recently, thank goodness, got licensed at the end of last year. And let's see, I'm a professor, so I teach and I do counseling. So I do career counseling and personal counseling as well. So the career part is how this kind of ties in. You want to say a little bit about?
Sure.
you?
I'm Lobus. I used to work here. I was the Director of Career Services. I left about a year ago to start my own career counseling practice. And Jackie's been working with me assisting CFPP students with the APA internship, APPIC, whatever process. She's more knowledgeable about it than I am. I generally work with, most of my clients are probably more business, marketing, those types of professions, things like that. I'll get some clients in education or psychology, but Jackie's been working with me for almost a year, right?
Mm-hmm.
So she takes all of the psychology-related students and clients that we get, because she's definitely more knowledgeable in that area. So, all right.
Great. Okay. So first we'll talk about the essays. There's 4 specific essays, and I'll talk about some just general things that you want to make sure you include or not include in these essays. Then we'll talk about searching for sites. I'll talk about cover letters, and then Allie will talk about CVs and interviewing, and then we'll close with some closing statements in general and just any questions if you have any more questions. So first with essays, and I put this up first. This is the very first essay that when your application comes through, it'll be a PDF. And so your whole application will come on a PDF. And the very first thing that they're going to see is your CV, is your cover letter. And then the second thing they're going to see is this autobiography. It is by far the most important essay. So if you are leaving an essay to the end, don't make sure it's not this one. So the autobiography, and the statement, it changes every year, the question, but it's always the same idea. So this one was from last year, provide an autobiographical statement. It's pretty open, it's pretty broad. But this is the only time that you can talk about yourself personally. So this is the only time in the entire application they're going to know you on a more personal level. With that being said, don't talk about anything that is going to be on your CV, that's going to be in another essay. Like a lot of times when students send me this essay, the number one theme is why I got into psychology or why I decided to get a doctorate. I mean, you can definitely write about that, but everybody writes about that, and it gives nothing different to your actual application. So a lot of other people will say, oh, and I worked here, and then I worked here, and I did this. Once again, this is nothing personal. This is all on your CV. So when I suggest students start with the autobiography, think of something. Think of something that you want them to know about you on a personal level. Now, talking about like if you went through a particular traumatic experience, not a good thing to write down. So there's kind of a happy medium between something that is professional while also personal, and then something making sure that it's not too personal where they're going to you're going to be remembered for the wrong reasons, basically. Second essay. So this is the theoretical orientation. So it says, explain your theoretical orientation and how it applies to actual cases. The first thing is you got to identify a theoretical orientation. So some students will say, oh, I'm eclectic. I do this and I do this and I do this. Probably actually very true for most of us that apply, because we learn a lot of different techniques and we apply them to different scenarios. I do that, but when you're talking about a theoretical orientation, you want to identify one. There might be a situation where you identify two if you truly have two, but it's going to be a little bit more difficult to talk about this in your essay, because you're going to have to talk about why and spend the 500 words to talk about why you have a particular theoretical orientation. So the second thing is you want to make sure it's good for the site. So let's say you are CBT, but the site is psychodynamic, clearly psychodynamic. Don't even apply for the site. They're not even going to consider you. So don't waste your time. Even if you think it's like, this could be, I could learn psychodynamic, or it's part of the training, you're not going to be a good fit. One of the most important things that you can do for this particular essay is include a clinical example. And this clinical example needs to actually show what you do. Let me give you an example. So a student will write that, so when you do a clinical example, you want to make sure you introduce the client fully. So you want to include all the identifying parts of the client, the age, ethnicity, presenting problem, how long you've been seeing them in counseling. So the reader gets an idea of what this client looks like. And let's say the student's like, yeah, so they were having, they came in for depression because they were having they experienced negative self-talk about a relationship with their mom or something like that. And you say, and I use this skill, I use thought stopping, I had them, I use this skill and this skill. Don't name the skill, tell me what you're doing. So actually tell me, when you say I use thought stopping, give me an example. The client had this thought, and I suggested that they actually say this to stop it. Because when you mention that you're just using this technique, you're not showing the reader that you know how to incorporate this particular theoretical orientation. So you want to make sure that you actually write what you're doing so they can clearly see. And it should be a good paragraph, maybe sometimes two, depending on your clinical example. Because you can say that you're a particular orientation, but to show them that you know why you're a particular orientation, that's going to speak louder, and that clinical example is going to do that. So if you're going to apply to sites that have different ages, so like if you're going to apply to a children's hospital and you're going to apply to a site that only has adults, you want to make sure the theoretical orientation, if you're doing a clinical example, that you have an adult example for an adult site, a kid example for a kid site. Unfortunately, if you send in, which happens a lot, when I was part of the application, like reading over the applications that came in, actually this happened a lot more than you would think. And it's just an easy way for them to throw away your application, because if they want to see if matching for their population, your clinical example. So this is the research essay, and the prompt was research interests, experiences, and goals. So unfortunately, this can be a very, very boring essay. And a lot of them are. So some tips on how to not make it so boring. I'm very into storytelling. I think it's a great way to get across your experiences in a way that's intriguing and not bland. So if you have a history in research, so if you did research like an undergrad, or you've been here and done a few years of research, give me a synopsis of it. Tell me what it was like. Not just like, I did this, I published this, tell me like what you were studying and why you were interested in studying it. If you studied different areas, this is going to be the hardest part, but it definitely can be done. If you have different areas of study, as a whole, try to connect them in some way. So if there's similar populations, like all with kids, connect them that way. If they're all within like health psychology, connect them that way. But start off with like a little bit of like a summary of what your research experience is. Second thing, tell them about your dissertation, especially if you don't have a lot of research experience. This is going to be a majority. And don't just tell me like what you've done, like that you did your proposal, you ran your data. Like, don't tell me that. Tell me how you came up with the idea. If it was someone gave you this idea, you got to make something up. Don't just write that my advisor gave me that. You have to create the story, like why you were interested in it. You know, what about it was intriguing? And then what you hope to find out about it if you aren't in the data collection point. If it's something personal to you, write that in. So something students do all the time is they'll write down their achievements, which is good in research. It's just not good to do in this essay because it's all over your CV and it's going to be on your actual application. So don't tell me about publications. Don't tell me about your like your poster presentations. It's very good, and they're going to see it on your CV, but it takes up words in an already short essay. So you kind of want to make sure that that you use as many words as possible to talk about something different that they're not going to see in your actual application. So the last one is that diversity. So describe your experiences working with diverse populations. So this is a great time to discuss if you have any differences that are important to you, like where you came from, your culture, how your culture might impact your work. So this is another time if you wanted to add something personal. You don't have to, but it is a time if you wanted to add something personal that you could. Now you want to make sure if you add something personal, it's not just like here's something personal about me, but this is how it impacts my clinical work or my research or what have you. But you have to connect it in some way. But actually I think if you can do that, it makes this essay much more rich and it explains more about who you are as an overall diverse psychologist. And then incorporate a clinical example using diversity. Very, very important. So you can say that you're multiculturally competent, you've had all this experience, you can even name some particular theories that you use, but what does it look like? Just like the theoretical orientation. Don't name things, tell me what it looks like. Tell me what it looks like when you're interacting with that particular client that makes you more sensitive or makes you more multiculturally competent. Tell me what it, so that, and then that's the majority of what this essay should be, is actually what it looks like. Any questions about essays? So here's looking for sites. So some suggestions about looking for sites. So when you look at sites, so on the APPIC website, you can open up a particular site and it's going to give you all the information on the sites. And one of the things on there is the ratio to the applicant to ratio. So how many people applied last year, how many were offered an interview, and how many were offered a position. So those are the three things. It's important. That is very important. Something's not popping up. It's very important because usually average, it takes about 20 or 30 minutes to go through every application. If you are applying to a site that has 200 applications, do the math. So it's very time consuming. And coming from a professional school, in all honesty, sometimes they might even just look and see that you're from a professional school and they'll throw away your application or they'll go to the next application. So you want to make sure if you're going to apply to a very competitive site, which is 200 and above, that it has to be an absolute perfect match. Like it has to be a great site, that you don't apply to too many and that you really look at that ratio, because sometimes they'll have 200 applications, but they'll interview half. That's not too bad. That's not too bad at all. Now they'll probably only have like 8 or 9 spots, but the fact that at least getting your foot in by getting an interview. Now if they have 200 applications and they only interview like 40 or 30, you just have to think about it. You have to think that unfortunately, and I wish this wasn't the case, but that not your entire application is not always going to be read. So you have to be mindful when looking at these particular sites to know if a site is a good fit. So have you guys heard the difference between the two, like scholar and scientific practitioner? You guys know the difference? So let me just talk briefly about it. Scientific practitioner is more research focused. Scholar practitioner is more clinical. Majority of your sites you apply to should be scholar practitioner. Scientific practitioner they're looking for people who have published multiple times, 10 and above. So they've had a lot of different publications. Now there have been students who got interviews for those sites, but they're much harder to get interviews, especially from a professional school, and if you don't have that many publications. Scholar practitioner, they're looking a lot for your clinical experiences, which we get a lot here. Interestingly enough, there was part of the application that says what they prefer. Do they prefer PsyDs or PhDs? So if they say that they prefer, what's the word? It's prefer or acceptable. So those are the two words, prefer and acceptable. If it says PsyD acceptable, they're looking more for maybe like a research focused person. If they're looking for, if it says PsyD and it's preferred, I would encourage you to apply. They're probably going to be more scholar practitioner. They're going to be much more open to a school like Alliant. It's strange because, I don't know, I think almost everyone here is PhD. But when you see that, don't think, oh, they want a PhD, but they don't want a PsyD, I should apply. Well, they want a PhD a lot of times because they want a research-focused person. So just keep that thought open. And I put here location, location, location. A lot of students, they don't match because they're not willing to travel and move anywhere. Not just LA, not just New York or Chicago or stay in San Diego because you have a family. You have to be okay to move to a very small town in Arkansas. Because a lot of people don't apply to those sites. There's less applicants and it's still good sites. You're going to get amazing training and it's 1 year of your life. I lived in a very, very small town in central Washington. It was one of the best years of my life. And I applied there because not a lot of people did, and it worked out to my benefit. So if you're thinking, I want to stay in San Diego, there's no way I'm going to move, totally fine. There's plenty of sites here, but everyone else in the country wants to come to San Diego. So it's going to be very competitive. So just keep that in mind. One of the things that students leave to the last minute is searching for sites. And unfortunately, what ends up happening is they don't have the time to look through every site that could be a good fit. I spent 2 months looking through sites. And I'm not trying to overwhelm you, but I looked through 2,000 sites maybe. I looked through so many sites to find the sites that were good for me instead of just taking a couple hours, which I know students do, and they still match. But I was able to spend more time deciding what sites are best for me, because I could have the best application in the world, but if I don't send it to the right sites, I'm not going to match. So really know that this is many, many hours should be spent looking at sites to make sure that they're a good fit. So give yourself time to do that. I really encourage that. They say to apply to at least 15 sites. Definitely 100% apply to at least 15 sites. I mean, I'm sure you've heard of other students that are applied to much more. I applied to 22 sites, and I would do it again in a heartbeat. But if you apply to more or less than 15, it's going to be much harder for you to match. So just know that that 15 number, either that number or higher than that you want to apply to. Any questions about sites? So cover letters, like I said, this is the first thing sites read when they look over your application. Unfortunately, in my experience, people know how to write them or they don't know how to write them. And if it's a very poor written cover letter, people move on. They have so many applications that if it's poorly written, they think the rest of your application is going to be as such. So know that this is the first thing that comes through. This is going to introduce your entire application. So make sure that you have somebody, just like your essays, but definitely for your cover letter, make sure that you have somebody look it over, multiple people look it over to make sure that it's very strong. So this cover letter is different than your cover letters that you've had for practicum or I'm like, what else do we have? Practicum. Usually in practicum they were like a half a paragraph or a half a page, sometimes a page. Not a lot of detail. This is very different. Very, very different. Usually it's around a page. Most of them are a page and a half. And I'm going to go through kind of the different components of it. But you kind of want this to introduce not just you, but your entire application, yourself clinically, if you're a researcher yourself as a researcher, and include a lot of different components, which I'll talk about. So what ends up happening on your cover letter is that you repeat things that are on your CV, and I'll talk about how not to do that. But that is, I put it's annoying because it's so annoying because you know it's on their CV and you're kind of just wasting space that you can write about something else that's new. Instead of just saying, I worked here, I did this is what I did, this is my responsibility, and make it more cohesive and more general than the specifics that your CV is going to have. And we'll talk about that in more detail. So I don't know how you guys set up, but I've seen cover letters go through that don't have this format, which is unfortunate, but it's just a professional thing, and I'll show you what that looks like. Kind of having the information of the company on the top left. So cover letters take a lot of time because it's not like you have one general cover letter and you just change the top and you change the address and things like that. You write 22 different cover letters. They have to be site specific. So what I had for my cover letter is I had usually like a general first and second paragraph, and then the last paragraphs were site specific. So I went to the actual site. I wrote down things about the site that I liked, rotations that I liked, trainings that I liked, people that I wanted to work with, and then I incorporated on why I'm a good fit. So it's not just like why I like your site. I like your site and you should like me because I can give this to your site. It's a nice little blend. And it shows that you care enough. You're not just writing a general cover letter, but you took the time to look up things about their site that you liked and incorporate it with your own general skills. It is something students don't do all the time. And when it happens and when there's a very nicely drafted cover letter, it's nice, and it will have a nice introduction into the rest of your application. So first paragraph, you want to make sure you reference the position and the site. I'm applying for this at this. Very simple. And then a general sentences on why you're a good fit. They want to know right away, I am a good fit. Continue reading my application because of X, Y, and Z. Sometimes I'll put here my future goals. So I've had this experience and these are my future goals, which is why this would be a good fit. But it's a general, just first paragraph of please continue reading my cover letter. I have something to offer your site. So some students will put here, and this is, you don't have to do this, but whenever I work with students or I do these when we do these presentations, I just say, some students will put that they're from Alliant. They'll put that they're a student, they're a fifth-year student or what have you at CSPP. You're more than welcome to do that. People have definitely matched doing that. If you have a site that is, for whatever reason, they have a bias against professional schools, they will read that and say next. So you can leave that off. You don't have to say you're in a PhD. You don't have to say what year. It's not going to make or break you. It's already in your application. So what they care about is who you are as a student, not where you're coming from. So it's a general suggestion. It's not a dig at this school at all. It's just, I don't want it to be something that makes them stop reading your application. Second paragraph, and this is where you have to kind of make sure not to just reiterate the information on your CV. This is a great time to talk about your clinical background as a whole. So just generally who you are clinically. This includes clinical, assessment, and research. If you are only clinical, then just talk about clinical. If you're only a clinical assessment, talk about those. But this is a chance for them to see, I have had these experiences. I have this experience working with CBT, working with mindfulness-based approaches. Like, this is generally, now this is not a time to say, and I worked at Sharp Mesa Vista, I've had experience working at a psychiatric hospital, working with these different types of patients. Like, make it like, if I could think of my clinical background as a whole in one paragraph and talk generally so that anyone in Arkansas can know exactly what you're talking about. So that's why you don't want to reference like Sharp Mesa Vista. Like, I don't know what Sharp Mesa Vista is. I'm a little town in Arkansas. But you want to present yourself, this is who I am clinically. Is it going to work for you? Is it not? But this is who I am clinically. If you have a lot of assessment experience, put that in. If you have research that incorporates what they would want at the site, put it in. If it's not, I don't see any really reason to put it in. So the third paragraph, this is where you want to be very, very specific. So you want to talk about what you like about the site. This is what I was talking about. You want to go to this site. Not just the APPIC site, you want to go to their website. You want to look at that site. That's why it's going to take time to make sure that these these cover letters are very site specific. But look at the training opportunities, look at the rotations, look at the groups. You know, one of the best things you can do is actually look at, a lot of sites are group oriented. When it comes to internship, mention a group you want to run and why. I've had that experience, or I'm really interested in this population. They know you went to their site to look. This is not something you wouldn't just get looking at their APPIC, like looking at their general site information from the website. If there's someone you want to work for there, mention that too. And then, like I said, kind of blend it into why you're a good fit. Because I've had this experience. Because because it's something that I'm really interested in, and I've had this experience, and this would supplement or give me training that I'm missing. And then the last paragraph is just reiterating why you're a good fit, making sure, again, saying that you're a good fit, you're excited. Some students at the end will put like their name, all their information, like their email, their phone number. You can do that. It's all over the application. So, I mean, it's kind of makes your cover letter long, but you're more than welcome to do that. There's no reason to take it off, except for the fact that it just makes it longer. It's all in the application. Any questions?
Okay, so now I'm going to move into talking about CVs. Do you all already have a CV to work with? Yes? Okay, awesome. Okay, so let's start with things to include in your CV. One thing I would just preface this entire conversation with is you don't have to put everything you've ever done in your CV. You want to think in terms of what is most relevant towards the sites you're going to be applying for. So if you're focusing on sites maybe that work with children, but you've got some experience working with adults, you might choose to leave that off. Or a lot of people, obviously you all are coming back for a graduate degree. Maybe you have work experience in your previous life that has nothing to do with psychology. So
obviously stuff like that you probably will not include. So as I said, just keep in mind you don't have to put everything you've ever done. You want to put the most relevant information and the strongest information you have to make you the most competitive candidate for that site. So obviously you're going to have your education and you're going to be in progress right now with your degrees. Are you all PhDs? Yes? Okay. So you'll put, Doctorate of Philosophy, Psychology, and I would put anticipated completion so that then you're making it very clear it's still in progress, I'm not finished yet. If you know your dissertation topic, focus, things like that, which you all will have proposed prior to, so of course you're going to know that. You can put that as well. And then there's going to be, you're going to have experience in different areas, so a lot of you, or you guys are probably used to a traditional resume where you kind of go job by job and talk about what you've done. On a CV, you're going to categorize your experience with respect to clinical experience, research experience, and teaching experience, and assessment experience as well. So rather than just listing like in chronological order the positions you've had, you're going to say, okay, here are all of my clinical experiences or my clinical focused positions, then my research focused experience, etc. Additional training, if relevant, if you've attended training outside of school, if you have any certifications or things like that, honors, awards, scholarships, those are definitely highlights, things that you might be able to set yourself above your competition if you can show that you've received awards, honors, scholarships, etc. If you belong to professional associations, you definitely want to include that. Kind of going along with that, if you've attended conferences as well or participated in any conferences, that can be something to include in your CV as well. Other professional activities, so, but as I said, related to what you're pursuing. So if you've had other professional positions that are not related, you don't want to include those. But maybe, another professional activity could be maybe you volunteer at an organization where you're working with a population that's related to, where you're trying to go or what you're applying for. Other professional activities, that could also be conferences, things like that. And then language skills, especially if you plan on staying in Southern California. If you have language skills, you're bilingual, trilingual, etc., that is a very highly desired skill. Depending on the geographic locations you're looking at, and maybe you're, here in San Diego, bilingual English-Spanish is huge, but maybe in the Bay Area, if you speak Chinese or Japanese or, so if you have language skills, you definitely want to include those, and sometimes that could be the difference as to why they're going to interview you over somebody else, because they have a population that, speaks a specific language and you're able to communicate.
What I actually suggest too for language skills, if you do speak another language, stick it up in the beginning of your CCV. Like if you have education, I might even stick it right underneath before clinical, because if it is something that could make and break you, definitely.
And you could also put that in the cover letter too,
Definitely.
right? Like when you're discussing why you're a good fit for that site, that could be a great way to highlight.
Very desirable.
Yeah. Okay. Things not to include in your CV. An objective statement, and you see these a lot more on resumes typically, but an objective statement, they know why you're applying, they know why you're submitting all of your application materials, so it's a bit redundant to say objective, to obtain a internship at blah, blah, blah. Coursework, at this stage, you're all G3s, G4s, G5s, 3 and above. When you're at G1 or at G2, it might be appropriate to include some relevant coursework on your CV because you haven't had a lot of clinical or research experience yet. But at this stage in the game, you should have much more relevant, concrete experience to include where you're not needing to highlight specific coursework. Assessments that you're proficient in. This is going to be on your application. So just a laundry list of assessments that you've worked with or that you're proficient in doesn't need to be on your CV. That's going to be in your application. Simple one day or a few hour trainings, you know, and that would be like continuing ed type stuff.
Yeah, stuff here, like workshops when you come for a couple hours, or even like, you know, like they have a group one that's 6 hours. I mean, that could be long, and it's just something that makes your CV extra long. That's not, it doesn't need to necessarily be on there.
Mm-hmm. But any trainings where you've earned a certification or something like that, definitely. You would want to include those types of things. And then research interests. You're writing a whole essay about your research interests, so that doesn't need to be on the CV. Again, as a G1 or a G2, that might be appropriate to be on your CV before you have a lot of concrete research experience, but at this stage, it doesn't need to be on your CV, and again, you're devoting a whole essay to that topic, so it would be redundant to have that on the CV. Questions about CVs? I think one of the most important things to keep in mind with your CV is, as I said, keep it relevant towards where you're trying to go, and it should give sort of an overall summary of your skills and experience. Okay, interviews. Okay, practice. This is huge. And I'm sure even if you've given presentations in class or you've interviewed for different positions prior to coming back to school, practicing what you're going to say is going to do wonders for you. When you're comfortable with how you're going to respond to things, and when you're comfortable with what you're going to say, it just flows out of your mouth easier. You're more articulate, you come across as more confident, you stumble less. You know, most often you're not going to be able to anticipate every question they're going to ask, but if you can be ready for at least half with responses that you feel good about, you're going to interview much better.
Can I just add one quick thing as being part of this process? You can tell people who have practiced and not. It is very obvious. And if you have a poor interview, you're not going to likely match. I mean, that's the end of the day. So just keep that in mind, that people spend a lot of time practicing. And like Ali said, it's very important.
Mm-hmm. We've got some commonly asked questions up here. I'm not going to go through every single one, but I will touch on tell me a little bit about yourself. This can be a difficult question because it's very broad. And this is a question not just asked in psychology. It's pretty much, you know, across the board, no matter what industry you're in. Things you want to keep in mind: you want to stick to your education, your skills and experience, and why you're there, basically. You know, so why I'm interested in this site, or why I'd be a good fit for this position. Things you want to stay away from are very personal things, like, oh, well, I'm married with 2 dogs, and I grew up in Mexico, and I've traveled my whole life, you know, things like that. You want to keep it more related to the specific position you're interviewing for and why you're there. The other ones on here, you know, theoretical orientation. I think we covered that in essays as well. You need to be able to articulate your theoretical orientation. But the main thing, you know, to keep in mind here is have examples ready to go that you can relate. Tell a story of, you know, when you've had an ethical dilemma or, you know, a clinical experience. Be specific with specific examples. And then the other one I'll touch on is strengths and weaknesses. That's one I think a lot of people struggle with as well. I personally think, you know, 1 or 2 strengths and give a specific example that demonstrates that strength. You know, it's one thing to say, oh, I'm good at multitasking. But if you can tell me about a crazy day in the clinic where you had, you know, 3 clients show up at the same time, and you had case notes you needed to accomplish, and, you know, and a bunch, and how you laid all that out and handled it, that's going to stick with me as the interviewer much better than you just saying, oh, I'm good at multitasking. You know, it gives me something to grab onto and remember, as far as, yeah, she must really be good because she gave a very specific example of that. For weaknesses, this one is tough because, you know, obviously you want to be promoting yourself in the best light while you're interviewing, but you can't sit there and say, oh, I don't have any weaknesses. You know, you've got to come up with something. So my advice for that would be, come up with what is a true weakness of yours and what are you doing to work on it. It doesn't necessarily have to be a clinical weakness. I had a client a few years ago I was working with who just by nature spoke very fast. He was a fast talker, and when he got nervous, it would get worse. And sometimes it would be difficult to understand what he was saying because he was just, so I said to him, that's a good weakness to tell, and say, it's been brought to my attention. Sometimes I talk too fast. I can be difficult to understand. So, I need to remind myself that I need to slow down and make sure I'm explaining myself well. Not necessarily a bad thing, right? But it's a weakness he was able to bring up. So, think in terms of, is there something like that that you can relay? And then, as I said, mention what you're doing to work on that and to compensate for that weakness. Anything to add on weaknesses now? Okay. We can, yeah. Okay, so Jackie's already mentioned this quite a bit. Know the site extremely well. Know where you're going, know who you're going to be meeting with. Stalk them on LinkedIn if you can, or even Google the people that are going to be in. Try and find out everything you can about them. There's a few benefits to doing that. Number one, it's going to calm your own anxiety because you're going to have a better idea of what you're walking into and who you're going to be meeting with. Number two, you might identify something in that person's background that you can connect with, something you have in common, which again is going to make you more memorable maybe than another applicant. Rotations by name, what is?
Or if you're applying, a lot of sites will apply to a specific rotation.
Oh,
so just
okay.
know which one you're applying to and why.
And then experiences you're interested in pursuing, like Jackie mentioned before, maybe there's a particular group that you would want to work with or a particular clinician that you'd want to work under or things like that. Okay, dress for success. We both, I think, agree on this. Wear a suit. It's better to be over conservative than under conservative. Some sites tend to be more casual, but if you can show up, full-on suit, very professionally dressed, that's immediately going to make a good initial impression. And then if other students interviewing don't show up with that level of professionalism, again, it could be a way to set yourself above the competition and make yourself memorable. One thing I would say is interviews are not the time to be trendy. I see this with students a lot. Even with professional attire and suits and things like that, there are things that are more trendy or flashy or things like that. This is not the time to showcase your fashion skills. You want to be very, very conservative, two-piece suit, blouse. I would say even conservative with colors, black, gray, navy blue, maybe tan, but nothing too bright, nothing too flashy. You want them to remember you because of what you say and your skills and your experience and why you're a good fit. You don't want to be remembered because of what you wore. Obviously showered, clean shaven. I would say either, no perfume or cologne or very little. Some people especially can be very sensitive or allergic to strong colognes or perfumes, so you want to stay away from that kind of stuff. No visible tattoos, conservative jewelry, same thing again, nothing too flashy.
I'm going to add just one thing to this. There are sites that will say, when they email you, they might say, please come in business casual. One of the sites I applied to, I guess right outside their building, people were slipping on black ice, and so they wanted to make sure you did not have heels, and so it was very specific. So I'm going to listen to that, and I'm just going to come business casual. So if they say that, don't think like, oh yeah, but that means I just show up in a suit. No, there's a reason, and if they happen to say that, then you can dress business casual.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so obviously there's going to be verbal communication when you're conversing with whoever's interviewing you, and then nonverbal communication. So nonverbal things, obviously are going to be how you're dressed, your presentation, your mannerisms, eye contact, all that kind of stuff. Also remember, most likely you are being evaluated from the moment you show up until the moment that you leave. So anybody you meet along the way, if it's a parking attendant, if it's a receptionist, if it's, you know, somebody sitting in the waiting room with you while you're waiting to be interviewed, you never know who has direct say in your evaluation as an applicant. Way back in the beginning of my career, I worked as a human resources generalist, and I did all of the first level interviews for my organization. I would always ask the receptionist, what did you think? How were they in the waiting room? And her input was very important to me as far as, you know, how professional were they and things like that. So keep that in mind. You know, from the second you arrive at that site until you leave, everybody you encounter and come into contact with may have input as far as whether you move on or not. I would be early, 10 to 15 minutes early. I wouldn't be, if you arrive earlier than that, stay in your car. Just because, you know, some people will arrive 30 minutes, 45 minutes, and then that stresses out the person interviewing you because most likely they're notified that you're there, and then they feel like they have to rush because you're there waiting. Obviously make plenty of eye contact with the interviewer, smile when you can, have good posture. You know, if you're slouching or you're not smiling, it may communicate a lack of enthusiasm for the position or for the site. And be a good listener and, you know, pay attention to kind of the tone and how the person interviewing is leading the interaction. Some interviews will be much more conversational and a give and take. Some will be more, they ask you a question, you answer. You know, follow the lead of the person leading the interview, and definitely, you know, if it is more of a question answer, allow them to lead the interview. Don'ts. Don't chew gum or smoke. I think that's probably pretty self-explanatory, right? We already talked about perfume, jewelry, not too much makeup for women. I mean, obviously you might wear a little bit, but don't go overboard. Don't look like you're going out clubbing or something like that. Don't interrupt the interviewer. As I said, let them lead the conversation, let them lead the discussion. Don't look at your watch. Again, that can communicate a lack of enthusiasm. And then try and stay positive whenever you can. You don't want to speak negatively about a former supervisor or employer or coworkers, things like that. Sometimes they will ask you a negative question, like, what did you dislike about your last supervisor? You know, so if they're asking you that, it's pretty much unavoidable. But in your response, you want to stay as positive as you can and then finish positively with what did you learn from that experience, or how can you move forward incorporating that experience. If you can come up with something kind of innocuous, like a good one for what did you dislike about your previous supervisor, I've coached people, you could always handle that with, well, you know, I'm more of a big picture and they were more detail oriented, so at times that could cause friction, you know, but ultimately it's good to have both of those perspectives to work effectively. You know, so if you could come up with something kind of like that where you're not, it's not a personal characteristic that you're saying you didn't like about somebody, you know, try and stay as positive as you can with that. Okay, so types of interviews. Most common type of interview is a one-on-one. It's one person meeting with you, interviewing you. And that could be over the phone as well. A group interview is you're not the only person participating in the interview. There are several applicants there, and it could be one person asking questions where you take turns through the group, or it might be several people asking questions of the group, and again, you take turns responding. That can be a bit stressful in that type of environment. You know, you're very aware of who else is interviewing and what they're saying. I would advise be complimentary to the other applicants. You know, if they're asked a question and they have a strong response, say, wow, I really agree with her response and I'd like to elaborate by blah, 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 blah. You know, yes, it's a competitive situation. They may only be hiring one person, but you want to demonstrate that you're going to be a respectful colleague. So you don't want to try and slam what some of the other participants are saying or speak negatively about what another interviewee has said. A panel. This is you're the only applicant, and then there's maybe 4, 5, 6 people interviewing you. Typically, they'll take turns as far as asking questions. Things to keep in mind in that type of situation, just because one person of the panel is asking a specific question doesn't mean that the other people on the panel don't care about what's being asked or that response. So as you're responding, you still want to be engaging and making eye contact with each person on the panel. And, you know, if it's one person asked the question, but maybe it's an area related to another person, oh, well, you know, Mr. Smith, you probably would have seen this too, and blah, 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 you know, so still engage with the entire panel, not just the person asking the question. And multiple. Every interview process is different. They may have multiple steps. You could have a group and then a panel. You could have a one-on-one and then a group. You could have a phone interview, then a one-on-one. So, I mean, it could be any combination of all of the above. And it could be a one-step process. You interview once and that's it. It could be a 3 or 4-step process. When I got hired here, I went through 9 different interviews. And it took 2 months. It was, I think you're the only person that didn't interview me, right? Yeah. So you never know. Just keep treating each one as if there might be an additional step.
And most interviews for internships are full days. So just plan on the multiple. So you have one-on-one, some groups, some panels. This is not like you go in and meet with one person and you're done. I mean, if they're expecting you to fly somewhere for an interview, you're going to have a full day of interviewing. So just prepare for that.
One thing to add too about interviews, be prepared with questions to ask them as well. Jackie had an interview where they asked you like 2 questions and the rest of the time was
45 minutes was me.
her questions for them. So for every interview, I would go in prepared with at least 8 to 10 questions to ask the interviewer or the panel. Sometimes, you know, that some of the questions on your list will have been discussed during the interview, so that's why you want to make sure you're going in with plenty, because you don't want to run into a situation where everything you were thinking or preparing to ask was already covered through the interview, and then they say, well, what are your questions? And you say, I don't have any. Again, that communicates a lack of enthusiasm. So you definitely want to be prepared with a good list of questions when you go in. Okay.
All right, so just some general closing statements. So like I said, reading over applications is a long process. So just make sure that if you're going to apply to a site that has a lot of applications, they have a lot of people apply, it's got to be a magical site. It has to be a very, very good fit. Don't want to say don't apply for ones that have high applications, but just know that it takes a long time to read those applications, so they might not be able to give your application the time that you're hoping that they would give. And sites that only get like 100 or less, obviously they can give much more time. So just something to think about. So this is something that my second or third year here, one of the professors told me that coming from Alliant, you're going to have more clinical experience than a lot of other people that apply. And I think for the most part, that's true. I think it is true. I think we get more clinical experience than a lot of other schools that are more research-based. But it is not, by any stretch of the imagination, going to get you the interviews. So just having an awesome clinical background is not going to get you an interview. You need to have a solid application. So a lot of students will tell me, well, but I have 5 or 6 different clinical experiences. I have this many hours. Awesome. It's not the most important thing that they're going to look for. It's actually, I think, the hours part, because you're going to have to put on your application how many clinical hours. I think it's 14, ranked 14th of importance out of 20. So and I want to say that because I want to make sure y'all put the time into the application that's necessary, and don't just fall back on, well, I'm so strong clinically that I'm going to get an interview. Unfortunately, that's just not the case. And I've said this, it's so obvious when students do not spend necessary time on the application. So there are so many strong, qualified students that apply. You have to be one of those students, and just having a great clinical background and experience is not going to make you one of those students. Most essays that I read, on average, each essay requires at least 10 revisions, at least. Mine, I think, was 15. But my essay, all 4 of them, were amazing because I took that time. Because I knew that if they're going to say no, they're going to say no to my time and the effort that I put in. So just know that. And not trying to make you guys overwhelmed, but it takes a long time to make these, especially the essays and the cover letter, very strong. So if you have the time, put that time in and have somebody look it over to get your revisions. Don't just write one or revise it yourself and think it's going to be sufficient. Essays are coming in that are stellar, so you want to be stellar too. All right, proposal. A lot of students I work with are doing their proposal and they're applying. I can't imagine what that process is like, but what ends up happening is all that time, which is hours in September and October you put into your proposal, is not going into application. So your application is already lacking all of that time and effort. So get it done. Get that proposal done so that you have sufficient time to put towards your application. I think one of the worst things is that if you turn an application, no matter if it's strong or not, you still put in so many hours of work. And if it's not your strongest, and then you don't get your interviews, or you only get one and then you don't match, it's an awful feeling to know you put all that time in and then it didn't work out the way you wanted it to because of that proposal. And I get it, I had to do it, it's really hard, but take the time now over the summer if you have that luxury of not having to work, you have more extra time, work it out, make it a priority. So different like people that or students that I've worked with, past colleagues that I've worked with, I sent out just an email and some text messages to get feedback, and I thought this would be helpful. So things I wish I knew about before applying for the for APPIC. I wish I knew how extensive the writing part would be. I wish I had looked ahead at essay questions so that I could start thinking about how I would want to comprehensively answer those questions. Unfortunately, some students don't start writing the essays till September. That's not going to give you an opportunity to really think about what you want to include in all those essays. And then it turns out is either not a good reflection of who you are clinically or personally, and it's not a very strong essay. I wish I knew how to effectively search for sites to ensure I was setting myself to increase the likelihood of getting interviews. Some students, they leave at the last minute so they can only look at like 100 or 200 sites. There's a lot of sites, and it takes a lot of time to look through them. So if you don't give that time, then unfortunately you don't get to look at all the sites and they go unlooked at. I wish I knew how important it was to continually improve my essays and cover letters, which I've talked about. I wish I knew it was a long, stressful, and emotional roller coaster at times. I think that's really important. It's hard. This process is very hard, and to be prepared for that. I don't think I was very prepared for that. So just something to think about and to know that it's not easy. I wish I knew that from our school we likely need to apply to more than 15 sites, but like I said, that prefer CITES, prefer more scientific or scholar practitioner. I wish I knew current interns have a lot to say on who is accepted. I think it's very interesting. My internship site, so I had a lot to say. If I said no, the person wasn't coming. If I said yes, the person's coming. So that, I had a lot of say. But interestingly enough, which happens a lot, there's an opportunity to call interns and ask them questions. It's shocking to me that people don't do that. If there's an opportunity to reach out to an intern, reach out to that intern. Talk to that intern. If you know all your answers already, who cares? Reach out, show interests. The people who called me, I remembered them. So when we were ranking them, I was like, she's interested. She wants to come here. Or when we were trying to, we were figuring out who to rank and things like that. If you can, get to know the interns if you have the opportunity. I wish I got help earlier on. Some students wait until the last minute to get help. And a lot of times, the people who are helping other students, so they're overwhelmed. So getting help early on is such a good idea. I started this process in June. I started my whole application in June because I had plenty of time. So I started getting revisions in June and July, which is why I could spend a lot of times and get my essays reviewed multiple times. I wish I got letters of recommendation from multiple people, so I had a few to choose from each site. So you're going to want to get not just 3 strong, but you really want to get, so sometimes the letter of rec actually won't be very strong, even though you're like, I'm so good, why don't you like me more? Why aren't you saying how strong I am? So if you have that luxury, get it from multiple people so you have choices. You have more choices, because at the end of the day, you can't force them to write the kind of letter that you want. So it's good to have some choices. Oh my gosh, this transcript. I wish I got an early start on transcripts so I didn't have to pay for rush shipping. Some students weren't able to apply for sites because their transcripts weren't there. So give transcripts, I gave transcripts a month and a half, even though it only said like 2 weeks. Just give it a month and a half. It's an easy thing. You just request the transcript and it has to be uploaded to the APPIC and all the instructions will be on there. But don't wait until the last minute, because if that's the difference between having your application accepted or not, I mean, what an awful thing, because you're waiting on transcripts. And just some last things to remember. First thing, this process does not define you. It does not define you, and so many students are emotional and cry and get very upset with this process. It's a crazy system. At the end of the day, it's just a crazy system that we try very hard to make very systematic to help students, and I think that it definitely helps, but it's not the answer. So the process, like every process, is flawed. You will get rejections. You will get emails that say, I'm not going to give you an interview. You might get a lot of them. You might get over 15 of them. You have to kind of just, and I say that to accept that there's going to be rejections. That doesn't mean that you're not a good applicant. It just means that there's other students, for whatever reason, that they wanted to interview. If you put in the time and effort, it typically works out in your favor. Students who put in the time and put in the effort match. Typically they match. This process takes many, many hours, days, weeks to do. I strongly encourage y'all to not wait until September or in October. Find help now. Find people who be willing to read your stuff, because the more time that you put towards this process, the better it's going to turn out. Any questions, guys? Any questions or anything, or afterwards you can come back up. I can give contact information if you need it, but Richards has taped this. Thank you so much, and we'll put it up so other people weren't able to come. But
we can also email the PowerPoint to you guys if that would be helpful.
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe.